with my colleagues, lead sponsor, City Council Michelle Wu, and also my colleague, City Council Tim McCarthy, to discuss Docket 0413. It's an ordinance regarding good food purchasing standards in the City of Boston. The matter was sponsored by Councilor Wu, referred to the committee on March the 14th of 2018. This ordinance is in part modeled after the standards espoused in the Good Food Purchasing Program developed by the Center for Good Food Purchasing in 2012. The Good Food Purchasing Standards Ordinance seeks to help the City of Boston leverage its purchasing and procurement power to support local economies as well as nutrition. And we have a valued enforce a valued workforce, as well as animal welfare and environmental sustainability. The ordinance requires the city's department and agencies, including the Boston Public Schools, to require procurement and service contracting of foods to adopt good food purchasing standards as a framework for guiding values-driven purchasing. The ordinance outlines how the city should transition to adopting good food purchasing standards, and we have, before I turn it over to the lead sponsor, we have two letters, housekeeping, from my colleagues. One is from City Councilor Anissa Asabi George. Dear Chairman Flaherty, Councilor Wu, and advocates, I apologize for not being able to attend today's hearings on good food purchasing standards due to a sudden conflict. I would like to thank Councilor Wu and her leadership on this issue. I believe that it's an important step and wish to offer my support for this initiative. Sincerely, Anissa Asabi George. And also from my colleague Kim Janey. Dear Mr. Chair, I regret that due to travel on council business, I'm unable to attend today's hearing on Committee on Government Operations ordinance to establish good food purchasing standards for the City of Boston. I applaud the maker, Councilor Wu, for sponsoring this ordinance. Establishing standards for food purchasing will encourage healthy eating, define sustainable food production practices, support local businesses and small producers, as well as institute safe working conditions. My staff will be in attendance at the hearing and look forward to reviewing the recording. And please read this letter into the record. Sincerely, Kim Janey. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues for an opening statement, and then we're going to go right to the administration, and then we're going to take public testimony. So I know a lot of folks have taken time out of their day to be here, so we're going to go into public testimony, and then we'll go back to the panel. So my colleague, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here, and particularly for the many organizations who are part of advocacy groups who have been at the table with us for several months now, as we're thinking about everything that could go into shifting of the city's procurement rules so that we're not only procuring the food for whether it be our students in Boston Public Schools or in different city agencies, but also making sure that every place up the food chain that we can have an influence, from the farm workers to the animals to which other local economies that we're supporting, that the City of Boston's taxpayer dollars are squeezing that extra bit of value out. So this is a model that comes from several other cities and was started in Los Angeles. We are very lucky that our Director of Food Services for the Boston Public Schools, Laura Benavides, alerted me to this and was has been following and was involved with this, has been involved with this program for a long time. She had, in her relatively short time at BPS, has already started to transform how our students are receiving fresh, feeling home-cooked meals, and how the district delivers that through now a hub-and-spoke model that is getting food to the schools faster in a more nutritious and delicious way. So it's been a real pleasure to have Laura and her team at the table as well, and to be exploring how, again, every single thing that we do in the city, we're trying to get multiple facets of value for our residents. It's in line with much of the work that has come out of this committee, chaired by Councilor Flaherty, whether it's our ordinance from last session that set new standards for supplier diversity in creating equity for city contracting, several terms ago with Councilor McCarthy, thinking about city services as accessible to residents who may not speak English as a first language or who have a communications disability, and making sure that we are doing everything we can to create that bridge and access for residents. This is yet another example of what we could be doing with city dollars to have that impact way beyond the city of Boston, but to also make sure that our students and those who are receiving these meals have the healthiest, most enjoyable experience possible. So this is in line with what Laura's been doing. We're excited to have her here, and we'll be excited to hear from all the advocates later too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Chair recognizes City Councilor Tim McCarthy for an opening. We've also been joined by City Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Honestly, Michelle summed it up quite well, so we'll just get right into it. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilor McCarthy and Councilor O'Malley waives opening. And as Councilor Wu had in describing, obviously, Laura Benavidez, your background, obviously, and you hail from Los Angeles, California, it should be noted, and you served as the you were former Deputy Director of Food Services at the LA United School District, and also you were there when they had adopted the Good Food Purchasing Program, so you have a wealth of knowledge on the subject matter. So I want to introduce you, welcome you to the City Council, and you have the floor to maybe give introductory remarks and comment on this ordinance and any other thoughts that you have, and then we'll transition into public testimony, give you an opportunity to hear from members of the public before we end the panel. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Flattery and Councilor Wu, for the opportunity to be here and speak on behalf of Boston Public Schools and the Food and Nutrition Services Department. I'm Laura Benavidez, the Executive Director of Food and Nutrition Services, and I'm even happier to speak on behalf of the health and nutrition and wellness of 57,000 students. Yep. As part of the district and in the business of education, I value the opportunity and vision to provide meals that create healthy, well-nourished children that are ready to learn. And I know that what they eat not only fuels their bodies, but fuels their minds. And the ideals behind the Good Food Purchasing Program gives us the opportunity to strengthen the nutrition of our meals by providing transparency in the food that we serve. And it is a philosophy I support directly. Boston also supports this approach through membership in the Urban School Food Alliance, which is an organization composed of the nation's largest school districts and their food service leaders to share best practices to leverage purchasing power to continue to drive up quality up and costs down while integrating sound environmental practices. I do have experience in the Good Food Purchasing Program with the work I did in Los Angeles. LA Unified was the first school district in the country to adopt the good food procurement practices and the standards that impact the supply chain of the meals served in schools. It was developed through a participatory process that engaged over 100 stakeholders and procurement experts. It asked LA Unified to commit, which is a major governmental institution, to set purchasing guidelines that are unique in their equal emphasis on a 5 food system value. Local economies, environmental sustainability, valued workforce, animal welfare, and nutrition. We focused the $125 million food budget to impact not only our students, but farmers, communities, and our vendor partners. And it was a commitment on all sides and a standard everyone had to live by. The intent of the purchasing program in all 5 values, which is local, sustainable, humane, fair, and healthy, must be measured and cannot be measured together and cannot be separated for the sake of ease or simplicity. All the producers and distributors must be measured against to verify that they meet and continue to meet the baselines in all the 5 categories, which is a really time-intensive prospect. Boston is very similar to LA in that we are both large urban school districts, both large in our areas, and both have immense support in improving the school meal programs for our students. In Boston, we have 3 models of service at schools, cafeterias, satellites, and the new My Way cafes, which is the former Hub and Spoke project that Councilor Wu mentioned, and which we serve over 57,000 meals a day, over 11 million meals a year. Our kids spend about half of their time, their waking hours in school, and consume about 30 to 50% of their daily food intake during this time. So this makes schools an ideal setting to promote healthy eating habits. We are a community eligibility provision school district, which means our children eat at no cost. And this status reflects Boston's population at being over 72% economically disadvantaged. But Boston has already been setting standards absent of the Good Food Purchasing Program and continue to push the agenda forward. We are committed to serving none of the harmful 7, so no trans fats and hydrogenated oils, no high fructose corn syrup, no hormones and antibiotics, no processed or artificial sweeteners, artificial colors and flavors, artificial preservatives and bleached flour in our products. We are focused on clean labels, which are food products containing natural, familiar, simple ingredients and that are easy to recognize and pronounce. And we have elevated our ingredient standards. So for example, our beef products must be 100% beef, no fillers. Whole muscle meats are required. And we require inspection for all our meat, poultry, eggs, and seafoods. Where we have a choice of local and the pricing is right, we go local. So some of our pizza and our bagels are local products. Our fresh vended meals are local and produced in the city, which means we've added about 50 or 60 local jobs. Our model in the My Way Cafe provides for more student choice and minimally processed and packaged food. We are above the USDA standards for whole grain and sodium requirements, and we have specific evaluation standards for vendors for school meals that include local procurement suppliers and processors, and we have partnerships for purchasing to increase our local foods and ingredients in our menus. So that's from local farmers, local fish. Some factors that seem important to consider as part of the Good Food Purchasing Program include financial implications. What are the true costs of implementing the 5 goals? The food seasonality, tracking expenses, the pace of the implementation, and bidder readiness. We expect to gain learning related to the Good Food Purchasing Program through an upcoming request for proposal. We will be releasing our first ever request for proposal for grocery items. We intend to utilize the considerations from this RFP, including the financial implications, tracking expenses, and readiness for implementation, as the opportunity to measure the success for Boston and to see the applications for the purchasing program. Again, I embrace the concept of the ordinance. Good food purchasing is a powerful idea. I look forward to learning more about the implications of the program for Boston and discussing it further in the working groups. So thank you.
Very good, and thank you, Laura, for your testimony. This ordinance, if it passes, it takes effect immediately upon passage, and it also requires that the participating city departments and agencies provide progress reports and compliance data to the City Council through the Government Operations Committee upon the committee's request. So I guess, not quite sure if there's a phase-in process, and I'm not quite sure whether or not you had one in LA, but I know if this ordinance passes, it takes effect immediately, and so I guess those baselines that you were referring to, I guess what does that mean in terms of compliance with the ordinance, and who would be responsible for ensuring compliance, and what would some of the processes be for that? So if it takes effect immediately, we need to make sure that we hit the ground running.
Okay, sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. When we implemented this in Los Angeles, it was obviously worked through to implement immediately. And we had to develop and work with the current contracts that we had to make sure that we were able to measure each company had to measure themselves against the five evaluations: local, their environmental sustainability, their animal welfare, their all of the 5. I can't remember all of them. And based off of that, it was and once they were measured either quarterly, and then we would, if they were not 5 stars, which is they were meeting our baseline, we'd have to develop baseline information to what we would consider something that they could check off to say if they were local. We would have to have our definition. So we want to say what local is, we have to define how local is. Is it within City of Boston? For Los Angeles, it was within 200 miles of the school district. So then by that, each company would measure how far they were away from the school district. So developing the transportation or developing how we would measure that baseline. So that for each goal, we would have to have baseline data to develop those metrics. And then each company would have to be able to provide a report on each one of those goals.
Okay, and then any additional costs that kind of come right out of the gate when you were in LA, did you encounter that?
It's manpower, because you have to be able to meet with the companies, you have to be able to share with them, this is what the new process is, this is the new legislation, this is the information, and then then having somebody, when they submit their information, then to be able to review, and then determine if you are not at the 5 stars we would want you to be able to meet all of the goals for the purchasing program, what is your plan to get there? And if they have specific plans, how does that impact the department? Meaning, what kind of costs would it be? Because they would be able to look at, in their current contracts, they wouldn't be able to add any additional costs, but if we were moving forward in the next contract, they could possibly add in additional costs to meet those needs so that they're able to meet our standards, but then their costs would have to be coming in from somewhere. It's possible.
Okay. My colleague, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Laura, I just want to review. I think I probably have these numbers written down somewhere, but just for the public record. So how many, if Boston were to implement something like that, what would our quantified purchasing power be? And how many millions of dollars are going into food through the Boston Public Schools, at least?
Our current budget for food is $18 million.
Okay, and that's not, is that both the outside vendor,
Correct.
the contract, as well as any schools that are not on the contract?
Correct. It is it is the entire budget for our purchasing for food. So it's all of it's milk, it's our dairy vendor, it's our groceries, it's our bread, it's in our vended meal contract. It is our, I think that's even water, everything that we purchase to be able to serve to students.
And so what's your budget per meal, per student, per day then?
Sure. So we aim for $1.43 per student.
And given your experience in LA, is that possible? I mean, how do you start to build in local and all these extra components? Or how would we start to plan for what a budget increase might need to be to include some of these components?
So in LA, my cost per meal was $1.20 per meal. It was lower, but a lot of it's our volume. So for us, when we would trigger a change in the food system, it was a huge impact because it wasn't buying a truckload, it was 10 truckloads. We were producing and serving about 750,000 meals a day. So it was, and so from that standpoint, it was a little bit an opportunity that when we were changing the food system, it was, or we were asking for specific products or things that we wanted to look at, it was easy, not necessarily easier, but something that they could note that when they was on the menu that they could make that significant change in their system and their ingredients and what they were buying to be able to be put on the menu.
Okay. But even at $18 million, there would be some opportunity to shift that, create those changes locally, do you think?
There is always an opportunity to focus on that. It's just a matter of what does it look like? Because even when we develop our menus and our plans, we could look at, when we develop a menu on a daily basis, we could look at one day it could be a little bit more expensive than another, but if it evens out, it's just a matter of making sure it doesn't have a big impact on the overall cost that I lay out for the budget.
Okay. And then in terms of the points in time at which you are making purchases and how long those contracts are lasting, does it line up well with the timelines outlined in the ordinance? So the provisions take effect immediately, but what happens immediately is the mandate that within 12 months there will be these standards communicated to certain suppliers and distributors and starting to create that baseline, and then 6 months after the baseline assessment to develop the multi-year action plan. So does that kind of 18-month ramp up line up with some of the timeframes where contracts are coming up or being put out for RFP?
So it does. It gives us time in a sense that our current contracts are, for our food contracts are yearly.
Yearly, okay.
So we generally release them sometime in March, April to be able to be prepared for startup in July.
Okay.
So it's an opportunity. So it may not necessarily, we can look at how we would develop our baseline and our measuring data this year so that when starting in July, to let them know that this are the standards that we want to have.
Okay. So, for example, just thinking from a council standpoint, if we were to try to hit the first cycle that would be beneficial to have an impact as soon as possible, one potential checkpoint is March or April, where and if there were something ready then, that would help you at least begin to inform some of the RFPs and suppliers.
Well, it can be sooner than that. So in a sense that when we're releasing an RFP for the first time ever regarding food products. So besides the vended meal program. But in reference to doing that, we would put this legislation, this information in there to then see how it measures back to what kind of response we would get back.
Got it.
Or would there be interested companies who know they can meet those standards, and what does the pricing look like? Even though the RFP is in two models, it's the proposal and then it's the pricing, but we want to make sure that we do evaluate both and see what does that look like. With a grocery RFP, what the difference is, you'd be listing out every single item, and they can give a price against what each item would be based on what we're asking for, in particular, and where the item is going to be coming from.
Okay, and my last question is, do you have any major concerns with the language or the ordinance as written? I know you've been part of the group, and we've been kind of working through it with changes over time, but.
I think for me, just making sure that we're learning a lot in reference to how it would implicate my budget, because I'm obviously responsible for it. The other is, I know that when we were in Los Angeles, there was a lot of questions and concerns regarding transparency of the information provided by each company. We wanted to make sure that when you do an RFP and when you're evaluating a company, it's always you get all of the information. You have small committees reviewing the information. Everybody's very protected in the data that they share. And all the information is released after the decision is being made. Some of the language here is requesting that either the information is probably shared before the final decision is being made. That concern, it could be a concern in reference to how the companies would be willing to participate if some of their company information is shared before a final decision. Because
Okay.
once you're a public partner, your information is public, but beforehand. it's
Great,
not.
and I think we'll hear more from the advocates on that piece. We've had a couple rounds back and forth with Corporation Counsel also about what exactly are the transparency rules or the confidentiality rules that 40B requires at the state level. So I think we're getting closer to that balancing point where there's transparency, but still enough for the business processes to work and to satisfy state law. But thank you for flagging it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a look-back provision? Did LA put a look-back in so that if someone was not forthright or didn't disclose the appropriate information, then you'll learn after the fact? Can you do a
When they
clawback?
were measured, yes, absolutely, because reports were due every quarter. So then if there was an issue or a concern when a company stated a particular thing and it wasn't
Gotcha.
true, then it would go back through and they would lose their contract and the business.
Okay.
Because their information was disingenuous. It didn't reflect what the ordinance and the legislation, the rules had asked
Yep,
for.
sure. Thank you. Councilor McCarthy, any questions at this time?
Just quickly, so if I got the numbers right, 143 per day per student,
Yes, sir.
what's the estimated that it would be after this is passed?
I don't have
That's
an
where, that'll be the RFP in March?
Yes.
Okay. And then my only concern really is a little bit off talk, but while I have you here, I might as well get you. We've talked about the hunger in Boston, especially with the Boston Public Schools, 4,000 homeless students go to Boston Public Schools. We throw out an awful lot of food. We've got to do a better job of making sure that that food either gets into kids' backpacks, because I know my wife's a teacher, but having said that, I know that a lot of teachers will pluck the apples, pluck the oranges, pluck the bananas, and not make sure those don't get into the barrels, make sure they get back into kids' backpacks, and they never come back in the backpacks. And then we also, and it's going to steal a little bit of Councilor O'Malley's thunder, but as we move forward to composting, this is something that Boston Public Schools needs to also look into as we start throwing away food, not just getting them into the main cycle. Composting would be very important. If we're going to push composting on everybody, we have to start from within. So
Appreciate that.
that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Chair recognizes Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your good work, and welcome, welcome East. Welcome to the Los Angeles of the Eastern Seaboard.
That's right.
With better food, I might add. Anyway, I just wanted to obviously echo my support for this ordinance. It makes perfect sense. It's another example of sort of leveraging group buying power, much like Councilor Wu and I are doing as it relates to community choice energy, for the public good as well, and the benefits of not only public health, better food options for our kids, better environmental sustainability, better animal welfare as well, something that this body's led on. I'm just excited to see this being put into practice and seeing the good that will come of it. So I really don't have a question. I want to hear more from the experts, and particularly the local businesses and the local farmers who may be able to offer some insight. I guess I would just simply say that as we go forward, it's important that when I know the author and the chair will continue to do this, that we engage as many people, because these will be there'll be some sort of unintended consequences whenever we change our purchasing sort of strategies, but often very good ones, so that we'll continue as a robust process and transparent process as possible. So thank you both.
Thank you, Councilor. And with Laura, if you just may stick around, we're going to do some public testimony. We'll take, say, 5 or 7, and then we'll go to the second panel. So I see, so I'm going to call some names. Dan Walsh signed the sheet, but didn't indicate whether he wants to testify. If he wants to testify, if he can make his way down to that podium. Alexa Kazmarski, Andy Sutton, Sheldon Lloyd, and Jen, looks like Abadia. So feel free just to step right up and offer public testimony. You just introduce your name and affiliation if you have any, and you have the floor.
Great, thank you. My name is Alexa Kaczmarski. I'm an organizer with Corporate Accountability, a nonprofit organization based here in Boston with more than 23,000 supporters across Massachusetts. Corporate Accountability's mission is to stop transnational corporations from devastating democracy, trampling human rights, and destroying our planet. I'm here today because we have the potential to transform the food that Bostonians, and especially our students, eat in a way that would have ripple effects throughout the entire food system. Across the world, transnational corporations are driving the breakdown of our food system, transferring control from the many to the distant boardrooms of the few. Corporations like McDonald's, which spend billions of dollars to market junk food to kids and site stores around schools, are creating a food system that perpetuates systemic racism and inequality and exploits people, animals, and the planet. For 40 years, Corporate Accountability has challenged these very corporations, partnering with allied organizations, community members, elected officials, and key constituencies to win victories. And the Good Food Purchasing Policy is one of the best tools we've seen to advance food justice and health equity, redirecting significant city resources away from those unsustainable giant corporations at the root of our broken food system and toward local food providers that hold nutrition and social justice as core values. In short, GFPP helps build the local, sustainable, thriving food system that we know we need for the sake of our planet and for the health of generations to come. Boston has the opportunity to be a catalyst city on the East Coast, bringing good food values to New England and triggering the passage of similar policies around the region and beyond. For all these reasons, I strongly support Ordinance 0413 and transforming the local food system here in Boston. Thank you for your leadership on this important issue.
Thank you, Alexa.
Hi, good afternoon. I stand here as a Boston resident, and I have two children also attending the Boston Public Schools. I'm also the partner and CEO of City Fresh Foods, located here in Roxbury. City Fresh Foods is celebrating its 25th year as a locally owned and operated food service company, preparing and delivering freshly crafted meals to greater Boston adults and children. So allow me to state for the record that City Fresh Foods fully supports the Good Food Purchasing Ordinance. Since our inception, we have operated with the same values and intentions and goals of the policy: local economies, environmental sustainability, valued workforce, health and nutrition. That's community health and nutrition. As a minority-owned business with 25 years operating in Roxbury and Dorchester, employing 93 and serving over 8,000 meals a day to mostly low-income children and seniors at schools, daycares, senior centers, and at their homes, we understand firsthand the enormous value of a program like this for our business, our employees, and our customers. City Fresh has supported the local economy in many ways. First, the majority of our employees are Boston residents, recycling millions of dollars annually back into the communities in which our employees reside, with a heavy portion living in Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, Dorchester, and Mattapan. On a side note, we've actually helped multiple first-time home buyers buy homes on food service salaries. City Fresh has helped incubate City Growers, which eventually merged into Urban Farming Institute, which we continue to support and buy local products from, which the Urban Farming Institute is a hyper-local farm, and it's within miles of our production facility. Excuse me. We have made a commitment to provide less processed, high-nutrient, fresh crafted meals to our community, neighbors, at a time when commodity food supplies dictate much of what local elders and children eat. City Fresh has created a village culture, and as of January, we proudly have celebrated $15 of minimum wage to our employees. We continue to improve on the local food system and attempt to provide the very best to our children. A couple other highlights I just want to mention is Camp Harborview and getting local. We introduced salads, and that is truly an experience of as much local food as we can get. It's a little higher in budget than the school system, but it's a model of getting local products and foods right to the kids who have seen a salad bar for the first time. And then recently, we've been working with the Shaw Foundation in their efforts to better the quality of food and children in our city through the My Way Cafe program. So we believe that the good food purchasing standards will be welcome in addition to the local food movement. As one of the few remaining minority-owned food service companies in the country, we encourage the City of Boston to consider including language in the policies that require supplier diversity, not just suggestions, but as requirements to contract. We would also like the city to understand that a looming and serious threat to the local economy and to small independent operators is the lack of affordable food manufacturing space. The bottom line, businesses like ours will lose ground to larger food service corporations who do not prioritize the values like livable wages and don't face the enormous burden of a hot real estate market that threatens the quality of inner city jobs, culturally relevant and nutritious meals we serve. Small and minority-owned businesses like ours will be forced out if something is not done to level the playing field and create policies that align with our collective values. So we urge the city to adopt the food program. We look forward to working with you to overcome these challenges. And thank you for your time, and thank you for your current efforts on this ordinance of the good food purchasing standards. And we are here at your service.
Thank you, Sheldon Lloyd.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jen Obadia. I am the Eastern U.S. Director of the Healthy Food and Healthcare Program at Healthcare Without Harm. I want to thank you for taking up this issue and providing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the good food purchasing policy, which I strongly support. I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are and what's happening here in Boston in the healthcare sector and how we feel that adoption of this policy can really help move that work forward, even in the private sphere. Healthcare Without Harm is an environmental health organization, and we work with the healthcare sector so that they become leading advocates for environmental health and justice. Our Healthy Food and Healthcare program focuses on the food system because we see it as sitting at the intersection of so many health and environmental challenges, such as climate change and chronic diet-related disease. We work with approximately a third of all healthcare across the country, including several of the leading hospitals here in Boston. These hospitals are already working in alignment with many of the pillars of the good food purchasing policy. They support local farm and food businesses by sourcing local as much as they can, and they see that as a way to address social determinants, such as poverty, by creating new jobs within the food system. They support environmental sustainability by sourcing from farm and food businesses that are certified by third-party organizations, and they see this as a way to address a myriad of health challenges, but chief among them the overuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture, which has contributed to the costly and deadly issue of antibiotic resistance. They also work to reduce the overall amount of meat that they're sourcing and serving so that they can address both the human health implications of overconsumption and their climate impact. Based on the deep alignment of our goals and the Good Food Purchasing Program, we fully support the adoption of this policy by the City of Boston. We see that the city adopting this policy will influence those in the private sphere to meet these goals. It'll do so first by setting a bar for what is expected of institutions operating in this system. It will signal to all institutions in the City of Boston that there is a best practice for purchasing food that takes into account more than just the lowest cost. Second, by directing city dollars, such as the $18 million coming from the Boston Public Schools, it'll be sending a clear market signal that there's demand for foods that are grown, raised, and processed in accordance with these values. The combined purchasing power of the City of Boston, along with healthcare institutions already working on these issues, will accelerate change in the supply chain, making these products more accessible to all. I'd like to thank Councilwoman Wu for her leadership on this issue and the entire City Council for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Jen. If I could also ask Dory Nang, Elizabeth Magner, and Stephen Ronan to make their way to the microphone. You have the floor, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Sutton. This is my first time doing something like this, so it's a testament to my passion for this issue. I'm the parent of a K-1 student at the Curley School, also a resident of Boston. In addition, I come from a farming family in the Midwest, and I also work at the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel Water and Food Systems Lab, where all of our work is thinking about the sustainability and resilience for our world's water systems and the global food web in which we reside. I am here to strongly advocate for the adoption of the Good Food Purchasing Policy, so thank you, Councilwoman Wu, for bringing this to the fore. I'm very excited about what I've read about what the policy could provide for our city, especially for our children. My daughter has only recently started at the Curley School, but I've already seen that the school food program has some room for improvement, both on having an abundance and enough healthy food, fresh food, and also reducing food waste. Schools are tremendous contributors to food waste, and I think schools have the potential to educate future consumers on how we are responsible participants in a complex food web, and that through thinking about all of the labor and the fossil fuels and the global resources that go into the food, that they can respect the food, and by eating healthy food, have a relationship with it and understand their consumer relationship to only eat what they need. I am enthusiastic about the way this ordinance supports local economies. We live in a region, we're fortunate to live in a region with many small and medium scale farms and producers and local food producers that we should be supporting and uplifting. I am very enthusiastic about the justice-minded approach to access to healthy and sustainable fresh food, especially since schools are sometimes some of the places where it's the only meal that some students get or the only fresh meal. Why not give every student in our city access to the same level of nutrition, at least when they're in school, especially since we have a challenge with some food deserts out of school. I'm very excited by the sustainability opportunity and the education opportunity around sustainability. So if we are providing a companion where we're implementing this ordinance and then also educating students about reasons why there are culturally appropriate decisions to reduce meat consumption, the different kinds of vegetables, the seasonality of the vegetables, a way that they're really thinking about being agents and being future agents in the resilience of the earth and the resilience of their bodies as thinkers. Also the nutrition, these are long school days. These are kids who are really trying hard to be as engaged as they can in the school process, and much of the research shows that healthy, accessible, nutrition-rich food will help them be better students and have more energy throughout the day. So I'm enthusiastic about that element. And I really think that this ordinance provides the opportunity for us to teach our children strategies to sustain themselves for their life and also sustain our earth and the whole human community through the daily experience of nutritious, sustainable, ethically minded, and ethically sourced food in this food program. So thank you for your time, and thank you for advancing the ordinance.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Good afternoon, Councilor Wu and members of the City Council. My name is Dory Nang. I'm the New England Food and Nutrition Coordinator with Forward Food, which is part of the Humane Society of the United States. On behalf of the nation's largest animal protection organization and our supporters in Boston, I would like to thank Councilor Wu for filing legislation to protect farm animals and the City Council for their consideration. The mission of the Humane Society of the United States is to drive transformational change for animals in the U.S. and around the world. This includes working on issues related to companion animals and wildlife, as well as farm animals. In 2016, the Humane Society was a coalition partner in launching the Farm Animal Protection Ballot Measure in Massachusetts that passed with 78% statewide support and 81% support in the city of Boston. The goals of the Humane Society of the United States are well aligned with the Good Food Purchasing Ordinance with regard to supporting farms with high animal welfare standards. The Humane Society has supported the Good Food Purchasing Program and has found widespread support from municipal governments and school districts across the country: San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, and Chicago public schools, as well as the cities of Los Angeles and Chicago. Just this week on Tuesday, the Council of the District of Columbia voted unanimously to increase healthy, plant-based meal options for students. This legislation formally adopts the Good Food Purchasing Program across D.C. public schools. Our Forward Food program has a strong commitment to teaching plant-based cooking through our free trainings. In Massachusetts, just since April of this year, we have completed or scheduled trainings with public K-12 school districts in North Attleboro, Wareham, and Nauset, with institutions of higher ed, including Northeastern, Harvard, Williams, Smith, Bridgewater State, Brandeis, Worcester State, and Boston College, and hospitals just this Monday, such as Spalding Rehab. Our trainings are offered free of charge and include a presentation on the benefits of plant-based eating and a hands-on training with our chefs and registered dietitians. I'm happy to offer Forward Food's free resources to the City of Boston if helpful. In closing, I'm very grateful for the City Council's consideration of this important legislation that benefits both people and animals. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much. All right.
Members of Boston City Council. Hi, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Magner, and I'm with the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the MSPCA. The MSPCA is based in Boston in Jamaica Plain, where our headquarters are, as well as our Angel Animal Medical Center. The MSPCA submits its testimony in support of Councilor Wu's ordinance regarding the adoption of the GFPP, the Good Food Purchasing Program. We strongly endorse the GFPP's belief that animal food products should be sourced from producers that provide healthy and humane conditions for their animals. Though many may think of the MSPCA as focused on companion animal welfare, it was in fact founded in 1868 to relieve the suffering and to advance the health and welfare of all animals, including those farmed for food. The MSPCA, in fact, has a long history of advocating for farmed animals, dating back to the 19th century when we fought against inhumane husbandry and slaughter practices. And in 1917, the MSPCA opened Nevins Farm in Methuen, which today remains the largest farmed animal and horse rescue center in New England. And in more recent history, we were a leading member of the 2016 Question 3 ballot measure coalition, which opposed extreme farmed animal confinement. And as you just heard, Question 3 passed with overwhelming public support at 78%, and even more so in the city of Boston, with 81% of citizens voting yes. In addition to prohibiting extreme farmed animal confinement in our state, Question 3 also prohibits the sale of such products in the Commonwealth. By adopting the GFPP, Boston would be virtually guaranteed to be in compliance with this new law, which will go into effect in 2022. Already, due largely to consumer demand, nearly 100 major food retailers and some of the largest food contractors nationwide have made purchasing adjustments in order to source higher welfare animal products, including here in Massachusetts. And so the adoption of this ordinance would be very much in line with not only the will of the state's citizens, but also shifts that are already well underway in the private sector. And the GFPP brings something invaluable to this process of making our food system more humane: a clear roadmap for how to do it, the technical assistance to do so, and a proven track record. This program has been successful in Los Angeles, Oakdale, Chicago, and more, and is underway in many other cities, as you just heard, in DC and also in Denver, and more. As you've seen or will see in materials provided by the experts panel, institutions are afforded both flexibility and also detailed targets. And so the City of Boston would be able to choose from a menu of clearly defined options as to what specific steps forward make the most sense for us, and would be provided support in carrying out those steps. And so in sum, this ordinance is both doable and the right thing to do. It virtually ensures Boston's compliance with the Question 3 law, reflects the will of the citizens, that our food come from humanely raised animals, and it relieves animal suffering. It would guarantee that, at a minimum, no food product purchased by the City of Boston came from a sow in a crate too tight to turn around, from a hen with a broken leg who suffered without veterinary care, or from a cow who had been given prophylactic antibiotics. The MSPCA lends its full and enthusiastic support to this effort and sincerely hopes the Council passes this ordinance. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Magna. We only have a few more on the public testimony side, so I'm going to take this opportunity to call down Joe Gajowski, Ken Toon, and Evelyn Kimber. Sir, you come forward. Welcome.
I'm Stephen Ronan from Boston. I want to thank Councilor Wu for introducing this and the committee for considering it. I've submitted testimony by email. So here I just want to say that my main concern is that I haven't seen a really thorough analysis of what the impacts are in other cities that have adopted it. So while I hope the city moves ahead during that baseline data gathering phase, I hope we can really very carefully look at what's happened in other cities and adjust the standards if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen Ronan. Is it Joe? Welcome, Joe. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
I'm Joe Sikowski from Joe Sikowski Farm in Hadley. My family has always farmed. We've never done anything else. We currently run a 400-acre farm in Hadley. 162 acres are certified organic. Our customers are mostly supermarkets like Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Market Basket. And we also do a lot with schools. We work very closely with UMass, and they've been wonderful and sincere supporters of the local farm-to-school program, and I don't think anybody's ever done it better. We're only a mile and a half away from UMass. It's been a wonderful relationship, and I think we've shown that we've come through over the last 8 or so years to show up with every order that was ordered. We also work with Chicopee school systems. Joanne Land has done a magnificent job with the help of Kindle Grant to bring locals' menus to life. We also work with Worcester, Hartford, Amherst, and a number of other schools. It's what we do. There's a lot of advantages to buying local and helping the local economy. The money stays in the state. The jobs are created. We employ about 40 people now. We do a lot of semi-prepped food. It helps keep open space, keep land and farmland. There is no culture without agriculture. It also brings fresher, healthier food to people. For instance, we're a mile and a half from UMass. The food couldn't be much fresher. We provide other schools like Chicopee. We're only just a few miles down the road, just a few hours. Sometimes the stuff we pick that morning goes on that truck that same morning. It also is better for the environment. If you were to bring in the same amount of food that we bring each day to UMass, a trailer load coming across the country would be about 400 gallons of diesel fuel. From my farm, a mile and a half, it's not even a quart. That's a pretty big difference. There's a lot of talk about sustainability. I'd like to do more than that. When I look at my organic soil tests, I want to make sure that I'm improving my organic matter in the soil. I want to do better than just be flatline sustainable. I want things better. And if I'm not spending my time in my life making things better, what am I doing it for? Also, I'd like to point out that the last few years we've shown ourselves not to be any more expensive. Often we're less expensive. There's not that much freight involved because we're coming from nearby. And there's a lot of talk about, justice with food. And I don't know if I can explain this, but if somebody graduates from high school and goes to get a job at Pete's Tire Barn, really, why should they be subsidizing a meal for somebody who went to college? The person who goes to college, they pay their own way for their food. And because we're no more expensive than anybody else, and often less expensive, I think it's fair to everybody, not only the people in school, but the people who are supporting the schools. We have a lot more capacity in our valley in Western Mass to do more. Right now, commodity crops are below the cost of production. The gross on an acre of corn would be about $450, which is, ridiculously low money. So to transition some of those acres into, vegetables and other higher value crops that are needed in the area is a good thing. 95% of the asparagus eaten fresh in this country is imported. 64% of the squash that people eat fresh in our country comes in from other places. If you deliver to some of the supermarkets chains like we do, you sit with trucks that are mostly from Canada in the summertime. We're also ready to work with any schools We work closely with a number of purveyors who bring produce into Boston. We have a truck in Boston every night to do the cross-dock, to meet the Trader Joe's trucks going to the different warehouses. We work with Tony Russo and Erica Putnam at Russo's Now. We ship to them a few times a week. We work with Costa. We work with a lot of your local purveyors. So I think a lot of good could come out of passing this ordinance, and we thank you for thinking about us.
Thank you, Joe, for testimony. And there's Ken Toon.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here today. And also I want to say thank you to Chair Flaherty and Councilor Wu, and for the opportunity to be here to speak on behalf of UMass Amherst Accelerated Enterprise in support of our partners at the Boston Public School. Let me share you about what we're doing at UMass. As the Executive Director of Accelerated Enterprise, I'm responsible for the largest and the most highly regarded collegiate dining program in the United States. We serve approximately 45,000 to 50,000 meals daily, and there's about 6 million meals each year. We have over 23,000 students just on meal plan, including staff and faculty members. Our workforce, including over 1,000 full-time employees and approximately over 1,500 students employees. We are proud that for the past 3 years, as you may have heard, the prestigious Princeton Review have ranked the UMass Amherst Dining Program #1 best campus food in the nation 3 years in a row. To achieve this status, we have to build our dining programs around the mantra, local, healthy, sustainable, and delicious as well. These 4 words guide everything we do. They reflect our serious commitment to promote student success through health and wellness while they are in our cares, and provide a student with healthy lifestyle that will last them a lifetime. Today, we partner with more than 70 local and regional farmers. We purchase over 30% of our produce locally, and we source over 4 million of food products from New England alone. Our dining program is helping to build a robust regional food system, which in turn strengthens the overall regional economy. In doing so, we also preserving the character of traditional rural agricultural communities. A local sustainable food strategy not only promotes health and wellness for your students, but also sustain the value of diversity and inclusion, social and economic equities, and cultural heritage for the entire New England. As Laura Benavides mentioned earlier, support the ideal of the good food purchasing programs provides the opportunity to strengthen the nutrition of BPS by providing the transparency in the food you serve your student. As you consider this audience, I encourage you to keep in mind 4 aspects of policy and practice that guide our local, healthy, sustainable, delicious strategy at UMass Amherst. 1 is encouraging stakeholders' engagement in development and implementation of the program. Number 2 is evaluating honestly your readiness for the implementations across 5 values of GFPP. Number 3 is putting the necessary infrastructure in place to support the magnitude and scale of the operations. The last one we also stress is to assessing realistically the cost implications of implementation. We endorse the concept of the ordinance, and we are ready to offer assistance based on our experience as an anchor institution that support a healthy food system and a fair and just regional economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. So obviously that concludes the public testimony portion, so I appreciate everyone's testimony. Laura, I appreciate you coming here and obviously participating, but as well as listening to the public testimony. So we're going to transition, unless you have anything further from us, Laura, we're going to transition to panel 2. You're welcome to obviously to stay for it, but I appreciate you listening to the public on that. So Jim Cavallo, Political Director, Business Agent of the UFCW. Suzanne Edley, Regional Organizer for the American Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Stephanie Shapiro, Berkson, Boston Citywide Parent Council. Brett Tolley, Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance, and Sharina McKinley, Business Manager for Commonwealth Kitchen. If you folks can just come down and sit right across from me, that'd be great. If there's anyone else here wishing to offer public testimony but has not heard their name or did not circle yes, if you could just indicate either by raising your hand or signing the sheet in. So you did not hear your name? Yeah. What is your name, ma'am? Oh, yeah, I had called you. Evelyn did the last round. So why don't you step up right now as these folks are getting ready? Why don't you come up and grab the microphone right now? Good. Welcome, Evelyn. Yep, you have the floor. This will conclude the public testimony portion.
My name is Evelyn Kimber. I'm a longtime Boston resident, and I have a 35-year avocational interest in the impact of our food choices on personal and public health, the environment, and animal suffering. I've been encouraged by the testimony I've heard here today. My interest in supporting the food policy program is my hope that we will always be looking at trying to increase the proportion of foods from plant sources and decrease the proportion of foods from animal sources in our schools and other city-sponsored activities. I get the emails from Greenovate Boston, and I always think that this effort would be consistent with the efforts of the city to improve our environmental impact. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Report put forth that animal agriculture, that is the raising of animals for meat, dairy, and eggs, contributes more to climate change than the entire transportation sector combined, all planes, buses, trains, trucks, airplanes, and so forth. So increasing the plant food proportion, decreasing animal foods in our food programs would be a big contribution towards advancing the Greenovate Boston program. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Jim, welcome. Welcome, everybody, to second panel. Appreciate your patience. Absolutely. The first panel and the public testimony. So you can just introduce yourself. We know who you are, but introduce yourself for the record, and you have the floor.
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Jim Carvalho. I'm Political Director and Vice President for the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 1445, here in Boston. I want to thank you for considering implementing the good food purchasing standards here in Boston and taking the lead in the country. United Food and Commercial Workers represents hundreds of thousands of food processing and manufacturing workers across the country for the purposes of collective bargaining. Our members in food processing industry have bargained to create strong middle-class jobs for themselves and their families. Unfortunately, there are too many workers in food processing that do not have the opportunity of middle-class jobs. Workers in this industry can often be underrepresented and taken advantage of by their employers. Many who work in food processing face terribly low wages, dangerous working conditions, especially in all types of meat processing, where workers must keep up with ever-increasing line speeds and use dangerous equipment such as knives and saws. This is why United Food and Commercial Workers Union has been supporting good food purchasing policies across the country and is excited that the City of Boston would consider it here. It is important for Boston to use its purchasing power to support employers who not only provide good compensation and safe working conditions, but also respect their employees' right to collectively bargain. The millions of dollars that the city spends on school meals should be awarded to businesses that recognize their employees' vital contribution to their success and create good middle-class jobs, which in turn create strong communities, prosperous cities, and prosperous schools. Once again, we are excited that the City of Boston is considering and debating a good food purchasing policy and what all of its core values mean to improving our communities. And I want to thank you for allowing me to testify in support of it here today. I also want to take the opportunity to have a huge thank you for Councilor Wu for taking the lead on this. Her leadership's been fantastic. And just make a remark that we're all very proud of the city of Boston. We know we, more times than not, do things better than the rest of the city, so I hope we also consider not just implementing these standards, but seeing where we can actually improve on some language that has happened in other cities. For us, the workers' right core value is important, but we also believe, creating a level of transparency too for the public to see just where public dollars are being spent too is also very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And as you know, the City Council's had a great working relationship with the UFCW 1445 over the years, especially as long as I've been here. So, so it's good to see you.
We appreciate all the past support from the City Council on all our issues.
Great. No, it's been a great partnership.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Suzanne, welcome. How you doing? If you could just state your name and affiliation for the record, and you have the floor. Yep, you can just start talking and it picks
Am I on?
Yep,
okay,
you're on.
great. My name is Susanna Daly, and I'm a representative of the Food Chain Workers Alliance, which is a national partner in the good food purchasing policy movement. I'm going to read a statement from one of our other national partners, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, submitted by Suzanne McMillan. And then I'm just going to briefly talk about our perspective as the Food Chain Workers Alliance and the impact that we've seen GFPP bring to other cities like Los Angeles and several of the other cities that have already been named. But first, on behalf of the ASPCA, good afternoon, and thank you for including the ASPCA in this panel. We regret not being able to appear before you in person, but appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of establishing a good food purchasing program in the city of Boston, and will respond diligently to any follow-up questions councilors or staff may have following this hearing. The ASPCA is the longest operating animal welfare organization in North America, serving as the nation's leading voice for animals for over 150 years and enjoying the support of millions of followers nationwide. Since 2014, we have steadfastly advocated for the implementation of GFPP in cities across the country. As a GFPP national partner, we involve ourselves and our supporters in local campaigns such as Boston, where we have over 22,000 supporters. In addition, we helped draft GFPP's current animal welfare standards, and we sit on the National Campaign Committee for Good Food Purchasing, helping set broader strategy. The ASPCA believes that all animals deserve respectful and compassionate treatment. This includes the nearly 10 billion land animals raised for meat, milk, and eggs in the U.S. each year, the vast majority in conditions that are cruel and unnatural. Public and consumer sentiment has increasingly turned against these practices in favor of higher welfare products, and some of that was alluded in prior testimony today. What GFPP offers is the opportunity to build on these sentiments by using their purchasing power to commit to standards that impact food production all the way down the line, including how animals are raised. In particular, GFPP offers two avenues for improving animal welfare. Institutions may opt to direct a percentage of their food dollars towards animal welfare certified products whose standards are verified by independent audits, or they can simply reduce their total volume of meat, milk, and eggs purchased. If enacted in Boston, either option would promote significant and critically needed improvements for animals in your food systems. In adopting this forward-thinking program for your public institutions, you have the opportunity to set a high standard not just for food, but for underlying values like the thoughtful treatment of people, the planet, and animals. GFPP offers a unique opportunity to align social values with something as tangible as meals served each and every day, and to see real impact. With that all in mind, ASPCA respectfully asks the City Council to move this ordinance forward, sending an important message that food should not only be healthy, sustainable, and fair, but also ensure compassionate treatment of animals. Thank you for your time and attention to this important issue. Now, if I might just move to my own statement as a member of the Food Chain Workers Alliance. We are a national coalition of 31 worker centers, unions, and advocacy organizations organizing to improve wages and working conditions for workers along the food system, as well as to build a more sustainable food system rooted in the principles of social, environmental, and racial justice. We have been a founding and national partner of GFPP, participating in the successful adoption of GFPP standards in several cities, starting with LA. And we're currently actively supporting what will hopefully be in the future successful adoption of GFPP standards in several other cities in the East Coast and in the Midwest. We believe very strongly in the Good Food Purchasing Program because it is a holistic and comprehensive way to address the food system, and in a way that addresses issues across all of the facets of the food system and how it impacts everyone, not just students, but small farmers and any kind of labor or business is associated with the entire food supply chain, which is directly or indirectly connected to food procurement of public institutions like the Boston Public Schools. And by food procurement in public institutions like Boston Public Schools is really sort of a powerful tool to impact the food system. And we've seen, that power in the other cities where GFPP has been adopted, including in Los Angeles. And I want to just provide you with some very brief statistics about what have been the measured impacts in Los Angeles thus far. Since its adoption in Los Angeles in 2012, the GFPP program has helped Los Angeles United School District direct about $30 million annually to local food purchases, including 45 million servings of bread and rolls made from sustainably and locally grown wheat, with a projected benefit of between 48 and 94 million to the local economy. It's created more than 220 well-paying jobs in the food chain and helped more than 300 workers achieve union contracts with higher wages, better health benefits, and stronger workplace protections. It has reduced purchases of industrially produced meat by nearly a third, with substantial decreases in the district's carbon footprint and water usage, and it shifted U.S. poultry production through the negotiation of new contracts of up to $50 million for antibiotic-free chicken. Engaging in GFPP in all of these cities around the country and being part of these coalitions, what we know is that communities across the board, across the sectors, do want greater transparency about food sourcing practices, and GFPP certainly provides that. But GFPP is not only expected to redirect millions of dollars to local producers, but also create the infrastructure to improve wages and working conditions for hundreds of thousands of food workers and their families, but also to improve nutrition, animal welfare, and protect the environment at the same time. And we want to congratulate the City of Boston for being a leader in the region.
Thank you very much. Stephanie, welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I hope I can, if it's okay to quickly say before we start that I'm so excited to see Joe Sadkowski live and in person, because I spent my whole dissertation for 5 years across the river, but still pretty close to Boston and Cambridge, bringing in local food from Joe Sadkowski via Lanny. So it's really fun to see him in person and exciting that he's here and so relevant to what we're talking about and doing. So I also just wanted to reiterate a thank you for taking the time for this hearing. This confirms the City Council's understanding of the important and powerful position of government in regard to food procurement en route to food justice, health equity, and ultimately en route to social justice. I'm Stephanie Shapiro-Bergson, and I'm a Boston public school parent of 2 boys, and I'm also a public health professor focused on food justice and health equity. A few years ago, a group of us BPS parents were right here in City Hall testifying about the essential role that schools have in a child's life, inclusive of nutrition. We discussed the research clearly showing that the well-being of and the high nutrient quality foods is a common thread underlying high academic performance as well as positive education behavior. We also highlighted that for some kids, the meals, as we've said already today, the meals they receive at school may be the only food they eat all day, and I see this in my neighbors every day. And for some, it's 2/3 of the calories that they consume. We concluded back then that a critical part of the city's food security system is the quality of school food. You listened and agreed and have taken many steps toward achieving food justice with hiring Laura Benavides, who is leading us in this GFPP process, and scaling up on our vended food provider and moving beyond with My Way Cafe. In fact, my family has been touring BPS schools to explore my son's 7th grade options, and food has come up as a question on each tour, and not even by me, ever. And each student tour guide has mentioned how much better the food has become in the past couple of years. So, now is the perfect time to take the next step to assure, and I'm going to go as far as to say longevity, of BPS students, as well as all others impacted by the city's food purchasing power. The principles that would ideally make up the nutrition piece of the Good Food Purchasing Program would assure the most current research-driven elements of health and wellness by focusing on procurement, food preparation, and service environment, enabling offering generous portions of veggies, fruit, whole grains, and minimally processed food, eliminating artificial ingredients, while reducing salt, added sugars, saturated fats, and red meat consumption. The most important aspect of implementing this program is that all would benefit. In fact, a nutrition policy principle would specifically address health equity. What's amazing about good food purchasing nutrition principles is that they directly intersect and impact public health, local economic development, animal welfare, worker well-being, and the environment, the other good food purchasing policy values. I have a journal article that I've submitted already where, that talks about each of these core values and the success in the first city in LA to implement this. Many of the things you quoted are in that article for your reference. But I also just wanted to point out that this article happens to highlight a key aspect of the success of this type of policy and the success in LA: supply chain transparency and third-party verification. Another aspect that also addresses each core value of the program, especially equity. What an incredible, all the while obvious, opportunity for the city of Boston to follow the other major US cities, taking advantage of its purchasing power to prioritize the intersection of public health, local economic development, animal welfare, worker well-being, and the environment. Boston has become a world-class city, demanding world-class, multifaceted equity by making good food more affordable, accessible, and culturally relevant. Sustainability benefits the least powerful among us, our lowest income, youngest, and most disenfranchised Boston residents. Boston joining the 13 other cities pursuing a good food purchasing program has the potential to leverage more than $900 million, almost $1 billion worth of food purchases annually, and therefore guarantees a positive shift in our entire local and national food system. And again, I thank you for this opportunity.
Very good. Thank you, Stephanie. Brett, welcome.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking the council members for having this hearing and allowing me the opportunity to testify. My name is Brett Tolley. I'm the National Program Coordinator for the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. We're based in Gloucester, Massachusetts. We are a fisherman-led organization building a movement toward healthier fisheries and fishing communities. I'm also from a 4-generation commercial fishing family here in Massachusetts. My purpose today is to speak in support of the Good Food Purchasing Program Ordinance and support the leadership of Councilmember Wu. And just to kick it off, to give another nod to Farmer Joe, if you take nothing else from my testimony, you could probably go back to his and just swap out farmer for fisher. It's a really similar story. As NAMA, we do have a long-standing and positive relationship working with the city of Boston. We work closely with the late Mayor Menino on lifting a ban on selling local seafood sold on public land in Boston and in farmers markets, including those hosted at community health centers throughout Boston. We worked with the Office of Food Initiatives on the RFP language and process for seafood vendors at farmers markets under the new ordinance. We've worked with Healthcare Without Harm, who you heard from earlier, to change seafood purchasing by Boston Children's Hospital, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary, Mass General Hospital, and more. We've hosted numerous seafood throwdowns in Boston to engage the community in what truly sustainable seafood looks like and what it does for our communities. We've enjoyed having some Boston City Council members take part in our seafood throwdowns, and including last year, we even got Mayor Walsh in the mix. The work we've done in Boston is part of a national effort to economically empower fishermen and women and improve the health of marine ecosystems and bring about a more just food system. And the GFPP brings us a lot closer to that. Now more than ever, we need to be thinking differently about our seafood system, and Boston can help take a major lead in this direction. On a national level, out of all the seafood that we consume, over 90% is imported. And the city of Boston is about on par with those numbers and that trend. And you might think, well, maybe this is because we're just not catching enough fish, but that's not the case. We actually catch enough values-based seafood to easily feed ourselves. And you might think, well, maybe that's because fishermen make more money when they export, but that's not true either. Like the rest of our food system, seafood is becoming more industrialized and driven by a system that solely values the lowest cost of production and commodities of scale. Right? The results that we're seeing in Massachusetts as a fishing community, and this is not unique to Massachusetts, it's up and down the coast, we're seeing major consolidation in the concentration of fisheries access, and it's concentrating to a few bigger companies, basically. Like a lot, if we've learned anything from consolidation in the rest of our systems, our banking, agriculture, and elsewhere, we know that this is a bad direction for our environment, our local economies, our culture, and especially Massachusetts. It's highly relevant knowing that the sacred cod hangs in our state house and is deeply important to our culture. So the city of Boston can help us counter this dysfunctional system by adopting the GFPP and lifting up an alternative set of values that we really believe in. When we support values around sustainability in our landscape or seascape, that means ensuring that we're matching the scale of fishing operations to the scale of our marine ecosystems. It means supporting small and medium scale fishing businesses who have the smallest ecological impact on our ocean. It means embracing the seasonality of local fishermen's catch and getting away from fin fish, aquaculture, and farmed shrimp. And it means supporting bottom-up participatory governance to guide our science and our management processes. So the GFPP really helps us go in that direction. In addition, when we support the value of local economies in our world, that means supporting jobs and livelihoods with jobs with dignity for all those whose hands touch our fish along the supply chain. For every job saved on the ocean when it comes to fisheries supports 7 additional jobs on land. And it also means supporting independent businesses, right? We know that when the money stays local, it gets spent in our local economies, and that makes a big difference. So not only does the GFPP complement the values that we're working towards, but we're also part of a couple regional efforts to support our food system, and the values of the GFPP also complement those efforts. Just to name a couple, the New England Food Solutions and the Farm to Institution New England, who are doing fantastic work, would align directly with this effort in the city of Boston and would contribute to a broader vision throughout New England. So in summary, the GFPP is undoubtedly a positive step in the right direction. We know this because of the value commitments and the accountability measures in place. I know transparency was also brought up earlier. We really value and care about maximizing, I think, transparency in this process. We ask all council members to vote yes on the Good Food Purchasing Program ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate your work. And at some point, maybe we can talk offline in terms of the sustainable fisheries and the role that the cormorant and the dogfish have on the fishing population. Particularly, they eat all the babies. So a lot of the focus is on sort of the bigger game fish, like the Atlantic bluefin tuna and bass and bluefish. But I think the ones that do the most damage, and it's not really the recreational or the commercial fishermen. It's really the dogfish and the cormorants, and I'd throw the seals in there as well. Just eating the amount that they need and required to eat every day, and plus they're taking the small ones, they're taking the juveniles right off the table. So, would love to get your input offline, or maybe that might be a cause for another hearing. But I appreciate your involvement in it.
Would welcome that conversation. And dogfish are very tasty and locally abundant.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we tend to protect them more than we should. Sharina McKinley, welcome. I appreciate your patience, and you have the floor. If you can introduce yourself and your affiliation for the record.
Thank you. My name is Sharina McKinley, and I'm here today representing Commonwealth Kitchen, Boston's nonprofit food business incubator and food manufacturing hub. I'm also a long-life Dorchester resident, born and raised in Upham's Corner, and have a background in small business development. I also want to say really quick that I'm happy that BPS supports this ordinance, because I also have 2 kids in the BPS system. So not only am I representing Commonwealth Kitchen, but I'm also speaking as a mom who has a kid in high school and one in middle school. So Commonwealth Kitchen is located in the old Pro Meats hot dog factory. A lot of people know that building. It's been there for a number of years. And the building had been there for about, I think it's about 60 years or so. And then in 2007, they closed the Dorchester facility and became a workers' co-op. So when they closed in 2007, all of those jobs vanished, and a little piece of the neighborhood vanished as well. The building remained vacant for, I think it was like over 12 years before a group of residents and local, federal, community people got together and say, hey, let's transform this building into the new hub of food manufacturing. Today, the building is home to Commonwealth Kitchen. There are over 55 food business startups that operate out of our facility. We have wholesale, retail, food companies, caterers, and food trucks. Out of those businesses, 75% of these 75% of the businesses are owned by women, immigrants, or other people of color. These businesses employ nearly 150 in the Boston lowest income neighborhoods, including many who face barriers to employment, such as limited English or people with different quarries. In addition to providing space and technical assistance to help these entrepreneurs start and grow their business, we also run a small batch food manufacturing enterprise for Massachusetts farmers and small food businesses. Sorry, Joe, to do it to you again, but we work with him. We work with him as well. Joe is well known in the industry. We work with him, and we do value-added processing for local farms, process excess crop, turn it into things that are sold to institutions and different entities. Every day in our kitchen, we see what it looks like when we invest in our local food economy. We'll have a Jamaican chef prepare to open a pop-up shop in Cambridge and a new restaurant in JP. We have a Korean food truck that hits the road to feed downtown workers. We have a baker from Cardman Square that just made 48,000 mini pies for 4 weeks for our first order at Whole Foods. We have a team of local workers that transformed hundreds of pounds of bruised tomatoes from our farm 25 miles north of the city into the freshest tomato sauce you've ever tasted. There are millions more stories like these in our facility. I invite our councils to visit our kitchen and see for yourself one day. Just think what these businesses and others like them could achieve if our public institutions committed to using their purchasing power to reflect Boston's values and priorities. Commonwealth Kitchen enthusiastically supports the adoption of the Good Food Purchase Program for Boston. The first tenet of the program, local economies, would have a powerful and immediate impact on food entrepreneurs in our city. It calls for our institutions to support diverse family and cooperatively owned small and mid-sized agricultural and food processing operations within the local area or region. It's no secret that businesses grow and thrive when they can produce at scale. By spending our public dollars on these small businesses, our city would be getting far more bang for its buck than it's currently getting. I am sure many of you saw the report a few years ago from the Brookings Center that found that Boston was the most inequitable big city in the country. Thankfully, we have started to improve, but the wealth gap is still staggering. We're grateful for Councilor Wu for introducing this ordinance and her unrelenting focus on closing the inequality gap in our city. We have a real opportunity to be a leader in creating an equitable Boston. The Good Food Purchasing Program is an important step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharina. Any questions of this panel? Councilor Wu?
Well, thank you all so much. You live and breathe this work, and I've learned so much from you just in the time that I've been thinking about this and learning more. If you just had one, or let's say a top couple, 1 to 3 things that the city and in particular the school district should be thinking about as we move towards implementation, what would those be? And I guess I want to add a sub-question, which is, it feels like a lot of the examples come from school districts or cities where where local is sort of year-round. I mean, California, you can get within a fairly close radius food of almost any kind. So how do we think about it for New England in particular, for Boston? And a lot of it is the locally not just grown, but produced and manufactured and put together. What are the other things that we should have in mind as we go towards implementation?
So what comes to mind when we think of New England and how things are just not available all year round? One of the things that we do at Commonwealth Kitchen that may be useful in this is we work with local farmers, and when they have excess produce, we take it in and we manufacture it and turn it into something they can use later on in the year. Like for instance, we will take, like I mentioned earlier, bruised tomatoes, turn it into tomato sauce, minimally process it in our facility, put it into these gallon freezer bags that are for food service, store it in our freezer so it's still good, fresh food. It's still impacting the farms. The farmers get to still get to sell it, get to produce it, and get sold. So I think like using those manufacturers in there, like to minimally process what is excess produce so that it will create a stock for the schools might be helpful. And also too, I think some menu planning that we all work together on what is being served would also help with that as well. So that's something that comes to mind instantly when I think of Commonwealth Kitchen and how we can impact, and also just using other facilities like ourselves, if it's not just us, for something like that.
I was going to add 2 things, and one to sort of continue what you were saying, and getting to know our local farmers, because one of the things I learned when I was doing my doctoral work in Cambridge, and visiting the farms and visiting Lanny's Orchard, who partners, he was a broker of farmers, introducing Cambridge to all the farmers in the area. And when he couldn't get something, he partnered with another farmer, and that can all come back right to the school system. But things that we might not know here in Boston, not being on the farm, is that you can take apples and pump oxygen in them, and there are storage facilities where they go much beyond the season. So, though we have a short growing season, talking with farmers who have a much bigger expertise than I do in this, the foods are available much longer than our growing season. And then the other piece that I think is extremely important is the supply chain transparency. And it's something we should pay attention to, because I think that's something that really will lead to the equity that we've all touched on.
I just want to give my input on this question as well. So The good food purchasing policy was also adopted in Chicago and Cook County, Illinois, which is not so sunny. And so they're, I think, grappling with the same sort of questions about what kind of infrastructure could really support the local economies in the way that's set out in the baseline standards of GFPP. But in addition, there's this understanding that while there is a sort of set of baseline standards that we're essentially asking sort of the institutions to commit to aspiring to, that there is leeway for local communities to define, for example, what local sourcing means. Or, for example, when we also talk about questions of equity, there's some ordinances that have also talked about creating opportunities for communities who are historically disadvantaged in these markets to also have opportunities, and local communities also have the opportunity to define what that means for themselves as well.
Yeah, sure.
And I think, like I mentioned, I hope the city of Boston, which already, we consider ourselves a great city, we look at it and say, where can we improve on what other cities have done? And for us in particular, the workers' standards, the core value for workers is important. And I hope we go beyond just saying, all right, let's award bids or contracts to people with, that provide fair wages, because what's a fair wage? Would you consider just minimum wage a fair wage? At least they're not paying $5 an hour under the table to their workers. They're paying a minimum wage. Well, minimum wage still, to me, isn't a fair wage. So I hope we support employers that go above and beyond in how they treat their workforce, and particularly don't reward, employers that may violate labor law or their employees' rights if they do try to organize and collectively bargain.
And I'll just quickly build off something that Sharina had talked about, which is educating our food directors in the school system and those who are in the cafeteria. When it comes to seafood, ideally the shift that we want to see is that what's being caught locally, seasonally, what's abundant, starts to make its way into our public schools, which means often embracing maybe species that folks haven't worked with before or even know. We have done a lot of groundwork with this level of education, how to talk about, how to work with it, how to think about it, and I think that is something to be ahead of the curve with, and we would lend our support at all levels to help with that.
Right. That's a good point, Brett. Obviously, Boston's home to, obviously, between the seafood industry and the seafood processing industry, just North Coast Seafoods alone, I think they've got hundreds of different species of fish that. And there's probably no direct connection from what they're doing down there in their facility and our Boston Public Schools. So that's a good point. And they're one of a lot of seafood companies that call Boston their home, right down on the South Boston waterfront. So it could be a good conduit to get folks to meet each other and start to do some business. So it'll be great. Anything else? Councilor Wu?
I get just curious to get the panelists' thoughts on how we should define local. Is it feasible to do Massachusetts? Is it New England, the region? What do you think?
I think I'm no expert. My background is more on workers' standards, but obviously there's lots of products that Massachusetts does produce in abundance. Obviously, the fishing industry is huge, and some dairy and things like that. I don't know if there's a way you can set standards so you're at least hitting benchmarks for how much is locally produced. I don't think Massachusetts can provide all the necessary food for public schools, but are there ways you can look at to at least you're getting so much from the local economy, the local growers and producers?
But maybe, Joe, would that be a question for you?
Yes.
200 to 250 miles would sort of be a fair answer. Interesting.
I worked on that during my doctoral work that I was referring to, trying to define local. And so, I think you also have to look at season and what's available, and and speak to farmers and find out what the availability is. So, and also in terms of what you brought up about fishing and thinking of the nutrition-specific policy, that directly intersects with the lessened red meat consumption policy as well with the fishing.
For local, I'm terrible when it comes to miles. I have to see a map. Is there any way that we can get some of this information if we think about it a little bit more to get it to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Yeah,
All
through the
right.
chair, that'd be
Definitely,
great.
because
Perfect.
once I know as soon as I leave here, I'm going to have so many different answers to these questions, and I'm like, I just want to make sure that we can send it to you so you can take a look at it after we put some more thought into it.
And that's a piece that doesn't, so the definition of local, the exact radius or boundaries doesn't need to be spelled out in the ordinance. I mean, I think we would all trust Laura and her team to really put all of the work in of understanding how the seasonality matches with what radius is. And again, it's going back to what several of you all of our experts have said, is that as long as the transparency is there, we'll have the mechanisms to kind of make sure that the actual results are lining up with the intentions of, I think everyone's on the same page of what we're trying to do, and then it's just about being able to track that over time and see what benchmarks we're hitting.
You know, one thing you have to think about is part of buying local is benefiting your own economy.
Yeah.
So that has to be part of your outcome measures as well.
So Brett, how far to the Flemish cap, right? And then you got to go miles to convert that to nautical miles for your industry.
Yeah, the complexity of local gets exponentially more difficult when you talk about fish, right? But just to add a quick 2 cents, and part of that too, right, is because we're talking about boat mileage as well, and sometimes we have boats landing in Boston, but they're coming from Maine, and they've already traveled 800 miles, you know, on the ocean. So we struggle with this. I think it's offset in many ways by ensuring, this came up in earlier testimony, that all of the values be combined as a whole and not cherry-picked, right? I think that ensures that however we define local will have integrity. We've found one way to at least move in the right direction. We talk about as local as possible, right? Or just kind of giving incentives. So the more local is generally better. If we don't have to put a mileage cap, you know, 5 miles is better than 10 miles, 100 miles is better than 200 miles, 200 miles is better than 5, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Very good. Thank you. Any follow-up? That's good. Well, I appreciate Councilor Wu's time and attention to this ordinance, and sounds like we're kind of almost there, and maybe some tweaks here and there that came as a result of this hearing, and particularly the testimony of both panels, Panel 1 and Panel 2, as well as the public testimony. So it's good. So with respect to that, will conclude today's hearing in the Government Operations Committee on Docket 0413, which is an ordinance regarding good food purchasing standards in the City of Boston. And as the chair, obviously those that are viewing that and/or there's additional information that may be submitted through the committee, either through testimony or folks that were viewing that weren't able to make it here, or someone that may watch it and want to submit some testimony. And then obviously we'll have a team back with the lead sponsor, working obviously with the advocates and the administration to try to get something turned around as quickly as possible. So with that, I appreciate your time and attention and your testimony, and look forward to working with you and the lead sponsor, Councilor Wu. You did a great job on this, and we'll continue to keep our colleagues abreast as we move forward. So with respect to Docket 0413, an ordinance regarding good food purchasing standards in the City of Boston, the Committee on Government Operations will be adjourned. Thank you.